All right, let me jump to the topic of today. It's about urban farming. And I would say that urban farming is not an entirely new trend. A lot of people have been growing vegetables at their backyard, doing community garden in the city for a long, long time. But recently, we have seen a diversification of this trend. So for example, you will see like small plots of lands, they work with the city's land bank to start to grow more vegetables, multiple locations. We started to see larger scales urban farm, in some disadvantaged neighborhoods, they even have high tunnels. So it's really about the production. And another trend is, we have heard about hydroponic, farming and aquaponic, farming, trying to, raise fish and grow vegetables in one system. So this kind of diversified trend kind of like caught the attention. And, today we want to spend an hour and have our three panelists here to talk about, the experience. They're all practitioners in the field. They have firsthand experience in the farm and do a lot of research on it. And so we are very excited to have them, to share their visions, their experience, and what the future holds for the practice, and why is it, related to our city, in general. So we would like to, spend an hour to talk about that. And at the last 10 minutes for the talk, I would like to open up the floor and invite your question. I think it's a golden opportunity is to have the experts, to answer your question or some of the issues that we would like everyone to talk about it. Since it is still, it's still the beginning of the diversification of the trend, we would really want to, bring more, attention to it. And throughout the talk, I hope many of the issues will, that we touch upon today, social, economical, and cultural, even political issues that we touch upon today will continue to intrigue you. And some of the questions I would really like you to take away at the end of the talk is how urban farming is changing the city, our city in Columbus, the social, economical, situation, and even physical landscape. And reciprocally, how the evolving demographics, the culture of this city is shaping the future of urban farming. And let me just also introduce to you our speaker here today. And I have seen, a lot of huts and, saying hi, I assume that some of you may have known, our panelists here. And sitting next to me is KB Jones. She is professor of architecture at Knowlton School at OSU. Among many of her research interests, I would like to highlight her study called Urban Farmscapes, published in 2011, and she kindly brought a copy of here, to show you. In this study, it contains 72 case studies of innovative urban agriculture sites. And her research also led to the food district at Wildland Park proposal in 2013. In the same year, Professor Jones chaired a two-day symposium named Situating Food and Food Situation in conjunction of an exhibition held at Knowlton School of Architecture at OSU. And sitting next to KB is Sarah Lenkay. Sarah Lenkay is currently strategic project manager at Mid-Ohio Foodbank. She oversees Foodbank's Urban Farm Initiative and is responsible for the launching of Foodbank's first large-scale urban farm in Marion Franklin neighborhood. Previously, she has developed and managed Foodbank's produce distribution program and worked with high-risk youth in a garden. And Carrie Lierl. And I have to mention that our original panelist, Abed El-Shaba. So he has a family situation and he is right now out of the country. And he has kindly connected me with Carrie today, and Carrie is a co-founder of the Columbus Growing Collective. And so she has the experience and expertise to talk about urban farming today. And about Carrie, she has a multifaceted academic background. She is a graduate of University of Cincinnati with a major in environmental justice and 3 minors in international human rights environmental analysis and policy, and sustaining the urban environment. In 2014, she and Abed co-founded Columbus Growing Collectives, and right now operating multiple urban gardens in different Columbus neighborhoods. So please join me to welcome the three panelists here. Have a slightly arrangement, the configuration of the space. I invited the panelists to sit on the high chairs and facing all of you and really trying to have a conversation. It's a really, casual conversation, even though we are going to pass the microphone around. But, I would, if you have any question, that you can think of, I would want you to leave it, kind of like when we have a break, to the next question. Maybe you want to raise your hand, and I will see if I can, let you, ask the question. If not, then we'll wait until, the last 10, 15 minutes at the end of the talk, and then you're more than welcome to raise your question. So to begin, I would like to first have each of you to talk about how did you get involved in urban farming, and why do you think that it is relevant to do it in Columbus? So maybe I can start with KB.
Thank you very much, Eliza, and thanks for coming today. When Gore Vidal was asked why he wrote all these great books about American history from his small apartment in Rome, he said, I just kind of fell into it. And like most of you, I'm an architect. These are the women you're here to really hear from today who have true expertise in the field. I'm a designer, I'm an architect. And I kind of fell into this work, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. I'm committed to it now. I see real great possibility, and I'm excited about this context for the discussion of this because I hope other designers will find their way to the potential that this work is bringing, both in your own individual work and in the way we're going to change our own city around the changing American food system. So, what you're looking at here, some of you may know the Gary Comer Youth Center in Chicago on the south side. This is a rooftop garden. The building was designed by the very talented modern architect John Ronan. It's about 1/3 of an acre that produces food on the roof of a brand new building. I've had opportunities, and of course in my position as a teacher of architecture, I have great young minds to work with. So when we come up with a new strategy for the design studio, we have some pretty energized and talented people. So I see the opportunity that I have as a teacher to bring people to both visit and experience these places and also think about how this is beginning to change some modes of design. Go further next. And in the years of working, I had the opportunity to work with Andrew Rosenthal and George Aycock to design the Buckeye Village Child Care Center, where the community garden located in the site became a real catalyst for the way we could bring an innovative new project to that site, and saw to some degree the opportunity the community garden provided. Later, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the myths that precede, and I'm sure the women with expertise next to me have had to encounter these. But there are things that we learned about in our research. The next major project that I got involved in with some of you here today was in the area of Wyland Park, where the university decided to put major research funding into collaborations around looking at urban revitalization that would try to address poverty, neighborhoods that had suffered from long-term generational poverty. And as we began to develop this work, MORPC came with leadership around looking to the federal government to get some U.S. housing and urban development resources for our research. We were successful in getting a 2-year planning grant for $865,000 to look at an agrarian urbanist overlay. And Brian Williams, who's here today, was critical to the project because he developed a regional-wide food planning plan that became kind of the backbone to some degree to help begin to think about this problem and specifically look at applied research in Wyland Park. This large planning grant included a lot of people with expertise in different areas. So the first thing that we did was look at the zoning struggles around urban agriculture and found that actually Columbus is in pretty good shape. We don't have a lot of zoning that would prohibit opportunities for urban agriculture. But as the project went forward, we really learned that a lot of shift and refinement had to come about in terms of what the vision for that project would be. to get to that point of refinement, I had a great team of researchers to work with me to develop the urban farmscapes collection of ideas, because we had to go around and see what other people are doing. What are the good ideas? We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to benefit from good things that had been taking place. So the Gary Comer Youth Center was a phenomenon as a successful, already by then several-year functioning rooftop garden environment. But rooftop gardening is very expensive and challenging for all kinds of ways that you as architects can certainly envision. You've got to structure that garden, you've got to maintain it, you've got to get soil up there, you've got to harvest up there, and so on. This had major funding from Gary Comer from Land's End. Now, to keep this really innovative social program going for this neighborhood, they have to constantly write grants to make it work. Nonetheless, it's a very beautiful, from a design standpoint, you get a chance to go to Chicago, it's well worth seeing. The building is sublime, very beautiful, and the projects are beautiful. This led to an acre and a half at grade that they were able to develop. So that's where the real farming takes place. We also came upon, you can go to the next one, we came upon, Chicago's loaded, as you know, they had good leadership for years and tax credits. One of the projects that when we had the opportunity to work with Carrie and Abed, we looked closely at was Uncommon Ground, a restaurant that grows a lot of food on the roof. This is an example there. And the research team that I had working with me as we went around to visit these various sites included Evelyn Van Til, who's the initiator of the 4th Street Farms. I had a planning graduate student, Rebecca Kemper, and Sarah Bongiorno. And with this team, we were able to do some investigation about the kind of places that would really provide the greatest insights. When Eliza mentioned tall tunnels, we learned about Joe Kovac's work at Worcester, where he, over 7 years, found that if you're planting berries and you use an architectural idea, the fact that the berry plants and bushes and trees grow at different heights under a high tunnel, and you integrate with polycultures instead of a whole field of raspberries, you can get away from using pesticides because the birds and other vermin can't get at the fruit. So there were these interesting formal strategies that became important to the science of growing food. So our 72 case studies came up with a lot of very interesting and important pieces of feedback that we were able to collect. And as I mentioned to my colleagues here, this was 3 years ago. This is out of date. I'd love to see more research go on in this area and begin to expand this because there have been so many fascinating projects. Another really innovative Chicago project is a for-profit renovation of a Chicago stockyards old meat smoking house called The Plant, which has, I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, all the bells and whistles, all the pieces working within a single urban building. But it's a building. It's not just a piece of ground. Forward. So as was mentioned, the outcome of our 2-year planning grant led to a design proposal for the former 3M metallurgy site on the corner of 5th and 4th in Columbus. And the proposal, designed in collaboration with Design Group and MKSK, was to look not only at the integrated potential for landscapes throughout the area, but then a project forward for this site. And what you see as green is proposals for green rooftops, forward, and a structure that initially, forward, and a structure that initially would be about 50,000 square feet that would incorporate a food co-op, a food hub, and this is one of the very interesting nationally supported endeavors toward addressing some of the urban fresh food needs, community space, community education space, community food incubator space, and so on. And this project now is in the hands of SEDCO under the leadership of the Godman Guild, looking toward putting together the business plan to do the business development. So we hope, not too distant future, an evolution of this project will come into formation.
Yeah, I want to highlight some of the key concepts that, KB had mentioned, in her presentation is that it looks like a lot of, this practice, urban farming is situated in a, disadvantaged, neighborhood. And, the idea that you mentioned about the food hub, and I understand that there are more than 100 food hubs nowadays in, in the country already. And I would like you, maybe later in the talk to speak more about, what the rationale behind, in terms of the location, that why we are doing in those, situation, and, why an urban urban setting. Why the type of population that we are focusing on when we do the urban farming. And I think, Sarah, can now talk about, your involvement, with urban farming. And I'm sure, you would touch upon, the topics or the concept that, KB has just mentioned.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here because you're a group of individuals that I don't actually interface very much with. I have a background in natural resources and have, over the last 5 years, spent my time at Mid-Ohio Foodbank being engaged in addressing food insecurity in the 20 counties in which we serve. So I'm excited to be a part of this dialogue and also grateful that it's with a different group of people than I normally interact with. And I'll also say I'm already feeling, from what Kay's been saying, and I know what Carrie will share, that with urban agriculture, there just is such a spectrum of practices, both environmentally, technologies, whether you're using cargo containers to grow food or you're growing in the ground with like a natural growing medium. There's just so much variety in what people are trying to explore and enhance our communities. So I encourage you to be really open and considerate of all the different ways in which people are trying to approach urban agriculture and how there's so much richness in what we're all figuring out as we really try and understand what it means to grow food in our cities, to engage people from low-income backgrounds, but also to have this creative culture that want to grow food for restaurants and then, on the rooftop of its actual restaurant. I guess with that, for me, and getting involved in urban agriculture has been a journey in which having a background in natural resources, coming at things from an ecological standpoint. So, we could have a whole nother discussion about food production techniques and the environmental components of food as a society, but we won't really go into that right now. Instead, my transformation has been more around how do people actually engage within their community and in turn improve their livelihoods as well as the community's resilience to difficulties in which they face. And having experience working with disadvantaged youth in an urban ag setting and seeing the personal transformation as well as just the basic need not being met and getting healthy food access has really led me to Mid-Ohio Foodbank, where for a couple years I was leading our produce distribution programs, which is handling millions of pounds of fresh foods and putting that into the communities, to now working at a smaller scale in a very localized way in neighborhoods that have a very high need. Behind me I have just a running snapshots of different farm photos. I didn't quite line them up to what I wanted to share with you today. But for me, Columbus is a tale of two cities. We have one group of people who are very educated, they're creative, they're creating new opportunities in the city. A lot of that's fed through Ohio State University and the financial institutions in which we have here that really anchor the stability of the Columbus city. And then we have this other tale where we have high needs in our communities. We have basically an upside-down T in the city of Columbus running along 71 North and east-west to 70 of chronic poverty that exists. And all of the indicators you would see relating to poverty, whether it's high food insecurity rates, low educational attainment rates, all contributing to one another, and they influence one another. So what we're seeing is great need and great prosperity in the city of Columbus. Mid-Ohio Foodbank, as I'm sure many of you already know, is dedicated to ending hunger, one nourishing meal at a time, and creating a community that can thrive. And so for us, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to help what was at the time a few nonprofit organizations, the local land bank representatives, as well as a financial donor and local business folks who were saying, we want to see urban agriculture in the city of Columbus in a way that we feel isn't here right now. We have a lot of great community gardens that exist, 200 plus, there's probably more that somebody can trump me with that number, that are doing great things to engage neighbors in the act of gardening and being in community with one another. But what we really wanted to see was a strategic approach to producing food on vacant land that could in turn take a piece of land that's been sitting empty and make something fruitful of it. And that's a pun. So you're doing both things, if you didn't know. So you have all this vacant land. We're not Detroit, we're not Cleveland, we don't have an industrial background where there are just large swaths of vacant land, but you don't have to go very far to see a vacant property, whether it's a residential or commercial property. And those properties bring down in a community. So if I'm living in a neighborhood that's disadvantaged, where I probably don't have many opportunities to be successful because my school isn't a high achieving school, I struggle to have my basic needs met, and then I live in this landscape that just is maybe crime ridden, it's unsafe, and then you have this vacant parcel of land that's littered in your neighborhood. To me, that really motivates me around, well, how can we expect people to thrive and to be successful individuals if we don't not only meet their basic needs, but also work to build an environment that promotes the well-being of a community. And urban agriculture really presents, to me, an opportunity to have a positive impact in a neighborhood, both from a social aspect, so you're providing healthy food to people. A lot of programs do training and education, as well as from an economic development perspective, you're bringing new life back into a neighborhood. And urban farming isn't a silver bullet. I will be the first one to say it's not going to save everything in the city of Columbus, but it's one piece to a thriving dynamic in a neighborhood that can hopefully spur and attract other development, whether it is a for-profit business development or a community engagement strategy that works with low-income children to make sure that they have their third grade reading literacy rates at an appropriate level. So to me, all of these things float around in my head when I think about urban agriculture. We have 2 sites that we are currently operating. One is on a vacant Columbus City school property. The school has been closed for 8 or so years and sits as a landmark in the neighborhood as a place where people went to school to get educated. And when it was closed, it just sits there. And so we've been able to transform it's a 7-acre site. We're now growing on 3.5 acres. We grow all organically. We are trying to blend a model that positively impacts people and the community we're located in, as well as being financially sustainable. So we are intensively growing food. We're selling a portion of it off-site to independent restaurants and wholesalers that then provide probably you all and me as consumers with healthy local produce to then put money back into our farms, while at the same time we're providing healthy food access to the neighborhood directly surrounding the farm through our on-site pay what you can farm stand. And I'll just also share one piece about with Mid-Ohio Foodbank's engagement in this work has really been a journey as well as an opportunity for us to figure out how do we actually work within a community that may already have food pantries and services that we're providing through our partners to then also better understand how we can create solutions together with people in a neighborhood versus trying to impose new solutions that may not be what they need for their neighborhood. And so the Mid-Ohio Food Bank, we did 24 million pounds of fresh foods last year. Our farm grew 20,000 pounds of food, so we're kind of a drop in the bucket when it comes to food production. But to me, every bit matters, and it's about the impact you can have on individuals, as well as creating that community change that can contribute to an overall systemic approach to improving our neighborhoods. It's probably more than I might have needed to do for my introduction, but with that, I'll kind of turn it back.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for sharing with us, and presented to us a picture about, the urban farming as a practice that is, originated from, a policy or from an urban planner standpoint, try to, make some underutilized land more profitable, and then they would, Ohio Food Bank obviously is driven, by a very clear social mission, to end hunger. So it's like the combination of these 2 purposes, that gave birth to the large size of urban farm. And our next panelist would be a very big contrast to speak against, to speak about, her practice and being from a grassroots, situation. And they started the Columbus Growing Collectives in 2014. And so Carrie, I would like you to talk about, how your journey, like, starting a grassroots group, and doing the urban farming, and how it might be different or how it might be the same, if with the urban, farm that, Mid-Ohio Food Bank is, practicing right now in the city.
Hello, everybody. Really happy to be here today. I don't know, I'm not used to speaking on microphones, so feels kind of strange, but I'll begin with a little bit about just what the Columbus Growing Collective is, because I don't know that everybody's familiar with that. We are in our first year and honestly have just been laying a lot of groundwork, so we haven't been able to do as much community outreach as we would have liked. So the Columbus Growing Collective is a group of individuals that are dedicated to sort of like our mantra of sustainable production with a social purpose. We operate on a multi-locational farming platform around the city, but on a very small scale, often incorporating the urban landscape and buildings into what we are growing. So that maximizes the potential of what we can grow and also allows us to reach out to different communities, expand our reach, and I think ultimately it will enable us to have a much larger impact. That said, our flagship farm, we just started this year. It's 2 acres and it's in the Italian Village. And I guess I'll share a little bit about how we got to this point. So my background is in environmental justice, as Eliza said. I got into the urban farming scene through this. I was living in Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, food insecurity is a huge issue, air pollution is a huge issue, gentrification is a huge issue. And so I got kind of sick of just studying the issues that existed in that community and really wanted to focus my last couple of years on what are some solutions. And I think urban farming is probably one of the most promising solutions to a lot of the issues that urban environments face. It can, if done the correct way, provide a space for the community to gather. It can employ people from the community. It can give agency to the people in the community that may be struggling about how it wants to develop its vacant lots. And it can improve food security. So I graduated with that degree, had gotten involved in the urban farming scene in Cincinnati, but realized some of the challenges through my work in Cincinnati with urban farming, which are typically land tenure, soil, resources, truly just like organizing enough people to really, it's a lot of work. So I wanted to study it further, and I embarked on sort of a travel around the country, and I was WWOOFing. If you're not familiar with that, it's Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms, and it basically is a program that allows you to work on an organic farm in exchange for room and board. And so I started doing that. Meanwhile, I had been developing this friendship with a bed who at that time was, if you're familiar with the Crust Gastropub, all of the A&R creative businesses, they are really attempting to have a very sustainable focus and source locally, source sustainably. That's a lot easier said than done when you're running so many different locations. And so at the time, he was trying to figure out how do you really get access to these I guess, high market value, high nutrient value, exciting crops to run a business that is like realistically sourcing most of its food locally. And so as I'm traveling the country and WWOOFing, he's trying to figure this out. And he happened to stumble upon an opportunity to acquire 2 acres of land in the Italian Village. Meanwhile, I was kind of like running out of money at this point in my travels and still talking to him about it. And he said, you know, why don't you just come here and why don't we just make this happen and let's give it a shot. Let's try to start this urban farm. So it quickly became apparent that because of land tenure issues, we only have a 5-year lease on the 2-acre piece of land, that it wouldn't make sense to structure the entire organization around just that piece of land, because if we do end up losing it, it's in an area that is rapidly developing, then does the CGC just collapse? So what we did to cope with that was incorporate all of the restaurants into our model. because Abed is part of the restaurant group, we basically came up with this funding structure for the organization that if we were to produce vegetables and fruits and herbs that they needed for the first few years, they would fund my salary, a couple other salaries, and some of the materials needed to get all of these places up and running. So it was a natural partnership from then on to actually start growing things at each of the restaurants. One of the coolest things about that partnership is that all of the restaurants are in very, very diverse areas. They're very, very different buildings. They, I guess, range from Clintonville to the Italian Village to we're expanding to the south side and on Parsons Avenue, which we worked with KB to design a green roof, which we'll be implementing this year. We're using walls, we're using parking lots, we're even talking about using those little medians inside of parking lots where they put the grass and the light poles. We're talking about turning those into sites for growing and just really incorporating the urban architecture into agricultural production while having this intensive production site and the Italian Village, which may or may not eventually move. So obviously it's a constantly evolving process. It's also been quite challenging because the group of individuals that we have arranged are so interdisciplinary that we're on like totally different pages about how to organize ourselves. We've got artists, we've got ecologists, we've got environmentalists, we've got just farmers, horticulturalists, social workers, and entrepreneurs and restaurateurs. So needless to say, people from those different backgrounds operate very differently. And I would say we have spent a lot of this season figuring out how to speak the same language and how to really get things done while still incorporating the surrounding community and getting all of those different people involved. And so certainly I can get into all the challenges that we face, but I really want to also stress how much I've noticed the real opportunities for a model like this. Even just a partnership between restaurants and farming groups. One of the coolest things is that we get all of the compost from the kitchen, which has enabled us to amass a really huge amount of compost for next season. We plan to keep that going through the entire winter, and now that's eliminating all that waste from the landfill. Also, if you think about restaurants, that often it's staffed by lots of young, I guess, passionate individuals that don't necessarily want to be working in a restaurant. Like, they want to get into something else. They might be planning to go to school again, but they're just working. And so oftentimes those people really want to get involved in the community and they want to be learning more. And so it's kind of opened up this huge, opened up access to a huge amount of volunteers and people that are passionate about the food scene that may not have otherwise reached out to us and gotten involved. And also just the microclimates that the urban environment creates. It makes it possible to grow peppers where you wouldn't normally be able to grow a certain type of pepper in Columbus. Yeah, so I think I really do want to stress the amount of room to tap into those opportunities, and I would like to see an expansion of the model that we've been working with. And I think, yeah, that's all.
I think two of the concepts that really tie the three panelists, the practice together, are two things. Really, I heard from their presentation. One is about the social missions, having urban farming practice in underserved neighborhoods. Another thing is about the business side of it. Sarah and also Carrie mentioned about the business side of it. How do you sustain the practice? So I think KB will be in a good position to talk about some of the myths. So how do these two concepts or two quite different things? One is about the business side. How do you make it work, and how this so-called the business model can incorporate social missions to make it work even better? So I think maybe KB can expand on that.
I said that I wanted to talk about 4 myths around urban agriculture because I think as we think about the potential, we think about the potential here in Columbus. We're all familiar with a lot of different innovations that are taking place. We face challenges. One of the things we learned about as we went around to visit the case studies and meet the people that we had encountered, people face some significant challenges that urban land trust has an economic side to it. You got to pay for it. You got to rent it, or if you work out a deal, you've got, as Carrie mentioned, limits in terms of your longevity on that piece of land. We learned about everything from the ideal chicken coop to regional organizations that funded and facilitated different kinds of programs in our research. But really, the first myth that I want to raise for consideration, and I hope not to be Debbie Downer with these, but first of all, we hear a lot, apologize, that should say, I can make a lot of money, not like effing money. I can make a lot of money selling product that I grow in my backyard, right? So I support the idea that people would see an economic value in their yard that they didn't before, But what's the problem? First of all, it's not all that economically lucrative. I don't know how many of you have tried to sell the zucchini that you overproduce for your family, but in my minimum experience of doing this, I would be losing money given the hours I'm putting into my backyard. Like many of you, I grew up with a mom who ran a victory garden, and we celebrated those delicious tomatoes, and it was wonderful. But let's not pretend that this is really economically viable for most of us. However, developing this as a practice is recreational, and it develops land stewardship. It makes us more aware of the value of the earth that we live on, and potentially a little more conscious, sympathetic, and aware. And it's a good teaching opportunity for me with my students, families, and so on, pass on these good lessons about the earth. Secondly, I can dig up my driveway or yard and I can grow some really healthy food for myself. Well, what's the problem here? Most of our yards is not producing very healthy food because the soil is not particularly healthy. When the 4th Street Farms group started and they had our soil testers from OSU come find out, you don't want to eat the food that grows in that urban soil. We've got a problem, and this is a very important problem for urban agriculture at all scales. The soil is not good. You have to mediate that soil. And so when Carrie talks about the virtue of getting the food waste to be able to compost, we're talking about the natural cycle. We've forgotten generationally what our grandparents and foremothers and forefathers knew about farming. There's one basic thing that you need. The most important asset is healthy soil. So how do we get that? What are the solutions to that? You may know that Ohio State's been winning awards left and right for its football events that recycle, I don't know, what is it, Carlos, 93% of the waste, and Price Organics is now selling nice little $4 bags of healthy soil, right? So there is an economics to this, and when we talk about how Will Allen got his business off the ground, Growing Power in Milwaukee, it started with making money off composting, finding a natural resource that's a waste product that's being thrown, it's filling landfills, segregating that out and beginning to do this. When I starting as many as 6 years ago, living in urban Rome, when you throw out your trash, you have to sort out your food waste, and the city gives you little brown bags that you leave outside your door, and twice a day, one of those little trucks comes by and picks up your own food waste. They have canisters in the city for your leftover olive oil and your oil that you've fried things in, and they recycle that. So other cities and other cultures are far ahead of us, and this is something that really has to kick in before urban economics is going to make a lot of sense. Okay, there are great economic opportunities with urban agriculture, and we see examples here, and I don't for a second want to diminish the fact that there are some really terrific opportunities that are going to evolve, but anybody who's tried to put together a business plan finds that it's not so easy, and there are a lot of appropriate and interesting multi-funded collaborative initiatives. And so everything from the way USDA has supported food hubs in urban neighborhoods to try to diminish food insecurity problems and so on, those are out there. A great example is Dan Carmody in the city of Detroit with his reuse of the Eastern Market, and Dan came as one of our speakers at our panel. He was operating with a business plan that was 40% soft money. at least to get going. So, and he is a for-profit kind of urban developer where the urban distribution of food locally within a neighborhood and taking on a lot of urban challenges was also sponsoring a lot of urban redevelopment on the area with housing and so on. He's working at a very high scale, but it's taken him years and years and years to get the project, to get the investors, to get the faith in the project. So economically, this is much more challenging than it initially sounds when we get very excited about the potential for urban agriculture. I want to say one more thing about how urban agriculture is going to get all of our urban neighbors out of poverty. I don't know how many of you know the offspring of sharecroppers who are dying to get back into urban agriculture. Well, unless you're growing marijuana, they've got other ideas about how to make money. Because again, this is not the automatic economic panacea. And it can be very insulting to suggest that our low-income urban neighbors are going to find this as their economic solution. And that's something that really has to be kept in mind from a social justice standpoint. You've all shopped at farmers markets, and you're more than happy to pay triple the price for that really delicious tomato. But once again, that kind of produce production is not going to solve the true problems of social injustice we have in our country around food. And finally, urban agriculture is the best panacea for this problem. It is one of many, and I want to underscore what Sarah said earlier, it's one of many. There are many things that have to happen to bring the neighborhoods that are suffering from food insecurity, poor educations, poorer access to good, healthy nutrition. Urban agriculture can play a part of it, but we can't look at that as the only solution to that problem.
I think, I can further a question. Maybe Sarah and Carrie can, elaborate on that. So based on, what, KB was saying, it looks like urban farming may not be a solution. It may not be the only solution to solve the problem of food insecurity. I want you both to address that issue. When your organization, doing the urban farming, what comes first? What's the priority there? Is it really solving the food insecurity issues? If not, then what other, benefits that you are doing, with the urban farming? So maybe Sarah, you can elaborate.
I can kind of start with how we understand our success because it's really multi-pronged, and I really appreciate all of these myths because for us, Urban Farms of Central Ohio, rooted in Mid-Ohio Foodbank, is really trying to figure out how do we have a financially viable model that can transform vacant land, and as a result of doing that, provide healthy food access, opportunities for training and educational programming around food production and job readiness, and then of course just providing opportunities for civic engagement, so neighbor to neighbor, peer-to-peer opportunities for people to share, learn, and grow together. That's really our overarching mission of what we're trying to do. And so to whittle down to what is the priority is difficult for us because all of them really tie into one another. So we measure success by how much food can we grow on 3.5 acres of land. We're projecting about 35,000 pounds will grow this year. How much money can we generate to put back into us? We're projecting about $50,000. So those things are very important to us, and when you look at the total operational budget of what we're doing, that doesn't quite make a dent in the staffing resources it takes because the first myth up there, I think, is the truest one about if food production was a super lucrative business, I don't think we'd be here having this conversation. Because the reality is there are small, medium-sized growers, not in urban areas. They are having a really hard time making it work. And Brian's an expert in food processing and food hubs and warehousing. It's just a very difficult reality. Food is undervalued in our community, in our society. And then you have the flip side of that coin where food is too expensive for many of our low-income neighbors, where the food bank, when we surveyed our clients, said, we don't buy healthy food because it's too expensive. So you have these two radical different sides of the spectrum, and urban agriculture is sitting kind of teetering in the middle, trying to figure out okay, we're a producer, but we're trying to enhance people's access to healthy food. So it becomes really muddy to prioritize. And at the same time, we're using those financial principles to really build the foundation of an operation that can be successful. And then the other ways we're measuring success is, our Pay What You Can farm stand. How many people are we providing consistent access to healthy foods? We're open 3 times a week, and people use the farm stand. They come and get what they need for their household. And we're trying to go a layer deeper of, how are they actually preparing it? Are they having difficulties in unfamiliar foods, they don't know what to do with it, or they're not preparing it in a nutritious way. But that's another way we're trying to assess, like, what is the actual impact of the food we're growing on the individual's health and well-being. And then, of course, we're moving more, as Carrie said, you do have to prioritize when you're building an organization and programs and operations. We're moving more into the training and educational component, where we hosted a job readiness program with teenagers this past summer, and looking at, these individuals who are going to graduate high school and become our future adults. There's 20,000, I think, young adults in the city of Columbus who are unemployed and not working. So that is a lot of individuals who, for whatever reason, are not progressing on the developmental spectrum of life after high school. So trying to figure out, how do you provide those job skills and just general preparations so that they can be successful adults and not maybe wind up needing food assistance. So I think all of these myths are really critical in trying to understand where we have the greatest chance to impact is something that we're actively trying to figure out. And like Kay said, addressing food insecurity just with urban farms and gardens is probably not practical. Because not all of us, one, have the resources to shop at the farmer's market, although come to North Market, we're there every Saturday. Not all of us have that luxury to do that. And also at the same time, not all of us only eat what we buy at the farmer's market. It's a great tool to support in communities. It's a great economic development opportunity for those growers, but it's not the end-all be-all. And I think for me, when I think about how you prioritize and consider all of these different aspects, I think it's being open to how they all interconnect and support and leverage one another, and getting away from this, I'm going to come up with the best technology to grow food in a city. I'm going to come up with the best distribution hub. And instead we're pulling resources away from each other, and instead of, putting them towards a common solution, because it's a food is very complex, poverty is very complex, economic health well-being is very complex. So, I'm very interested through our initiatives figuring out how do we create an urban farm initiative that's, one, successful, having an impact on our communities and people, and two, being a part of a larger food landscape, as I like to call it. A garden, a farm is just one piece of a landscape. There's corner stores, there's where all of us probably shop, grocery stores, supermarkets. There's all of these other components that, I'm really interested in creating linkages through conversation and planning processes that can actually enhance a person's, of all incomes, to have healthy food access and be in a community that is more likely to have them be successful and thrive. So, yeah.
So, I actually had a conversation with Carrie yesterday, and, she actually mentioned about, a model that, that group is using in kind of like, so like KB and Sarah were saying that all the food that's being produced by the urban farming that, that's been now going on, the cost of labor is actually very high. And so the products, the produce will need to sell at a high price in order to make it work. And Carrie, yesterday you mentioned to me that, there's a way that you guys can do it in a way that you can balance it out, maybe sell those produce to the restaurant at a higher price, but at the same time you can do other things to kind of like equal it out, and let the people who actually need the fresh produce the most, the underserved neighborhood, to enjoy that. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I have to admit that when I got into urban agriculture, I think I believed all of those myths. I was just like, I just graduated college, I was a social justice advocate, I had been working on farms that were having an impact. And I do think, to qualify, that those myths are not always true. It's possible to attain those objectives, but there's a lot more to it than that. I guess. And what I've realized is I think in order to be successful, you really need to be extremely creative. You have to diversify your revenue streams. For me, I think the highest perceived value is just the presence of a community space, a space to gather, a beautiful space, a space that's not, if it's not perfectly remediated, at least it's in the process of being remediated environmentally, and just involving the community in the work is number one. I think the most important element of it for me. Number two, I think education is really very, it's possible and people are willing to pay for it. That's another revenue stream that you can tap into. Also, so I guess to backtrack a little bit, what we realized early on is that we would have to balance the objective of producing high market value, high nutrient content, almost like hipster type foods for the foodies on a massive scale, sort of an industrial style scale, in order to fund these other elements, to get them rolling, to make them successful, and to grow the foods that people actually want, like a bunch of tomatoes and collard greens and popular foods that people already know how to cook and would like to come be involved in growing. So having a big space is really helpful for that. We have kind of, I wish I had a picture, or I guess there are kind of pictures of like the early stages of, we have these big industrial style beds where we grow a bunch of like striped beets, striped candied beets and radishes and tricolored carrots. And then in between those plots, we're gonna create a community space where everybody can come grow and take what they want, a free garden, if you will. And that, I mean, seriously, the labor and material costs that have gone into the more industrial style farming operation have been so exorbitant, so much more than I expected, that it's still gonna take a couple years to actually balance that relationship out. But I do think it's possible, especially through tapping into compost. We are working on it, yeah, because water collection is a huge issue on the site. There's a lot of standing water. Really, we're just trying to figure out, because there's so much concrete, like just like maybe a foot or two below the grass, how to actually get structures in the ground. Like I'm toying with the idea right now of filling Rubbermaid buckets with concrete and using those as the foundation for sheds and stuff like that, because you just can't get deep enough. I mean, the first couple of months of the farm, we were toting water to the site. And of course, as soon as we got the spigot installed, which was a really expensive, terrible process that like we're still struggling with, that huge rain for like the next 3 weeks it rained. So that's the irony of everything. But definitely, if that process had been easier, less expensive, more streamlined, if it were a city opportunity to work with the city, that would have made the season a lot different for us.
Yeah, and I want to add that, you know, with urban farming, you're talking about physical improvements to a landscape. So, so Carrie was telling me before the presentation about, you know, the site development and getting that site ready to actually produce food. We have a move-in ready site, we always joke, because it was a schoolyard basically, and before that it was farmland. So soil quality was very rich, and we worked very hard to maintain that that soil nutrient composition, so we don't devalue our resource. And then you're talking about, with us, we're doing high tunnels, which are season extension methods that I know Carrie uses as well, which basically is a unheated greenhouse, big giant piece of plastic. But that's a physical improvement you're making to the landscape. And that comes with an association of city zoning regulations and adherences you have to abide by that, you know, we're talking about, we want to use this ground and grow vegetables in it. And we want to basically put a giant piece of plastic over it so we can control the temperature. And that triggered storm mitigation planning, which is very costly, and us having to hire architects and engineers. So I think that reconsideration of how food is in our physical landscape and what all that means is an opportunity for us to learn more about, because also our second location in the Hilltop is the former Ohio Psychiatric Hospital, the old mammoth structure that was torn down in the 90s. We're now leasing 5 acres of that property, and the soil quality is terrible. It's undergone significant remediation to actually pull out contaminants as well as physical debris, but now we're in the process of importing soil from local donors and compost companies, as well as installing water. I mean, these things are, to me, I see it as an investment in the community, that we're serious, we're here, we're putting dollars into the transformation of this landscape. And then there's the very practical side of getting water, having soil, your biggest resource, making sure you have the physical properties to actually grow food, and then when you harvest it, you need to wash it, pack it, get it ready to go out the door. So I think urban farming is stepping it up in terms of really being process-oriented and wanting to build a foundational structure for operations, and at the same time isn't kind of, I don't think is considered in development aspects in the same way as other projects that, you know, we could better link with, like housing projects when they're going in. And
About workforce development and creating a lot of jobs.
yes, yes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity around there. So, you know, being a part of this presentation was just exciting in that way, from how we've been interfacing with your sector and how there is a lot of place to be creative, because that's really what it's taking. It's taking some grit, creativity, and just pure hard work. That is kind of how we're building urban agriculture, and we're ready to invite others to be a part of what we're doing and to help us figure this out. So we're not recreating systems and processes that already exist.
How about sponsoring a high tunnel design competition?
Yes, and yeah, and sponsoring the mitigation planning process. That's expensive. That's very expensive. We're actually constrained with resources right now and putting high tunnels at the new location because of the cost to actually hire an engineer firm and to do the stormwater mitigation. For, again, land is our biggest asset. We don't want to ruin the land. So being creative with the city of Columbus, and they're doing a new business plan. I believe one of the firms, a part of this collective, is involved in that, so we're very much looking forward to what will come out of that work, and excited.
So, well, thank you all for coming.